Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Someone turn the lights. Can you turn the lights on? Reading from the Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, text number 42. Okay. Ta ataya yoginameva kule bhavati dimati etadi durlabhataram loke janma drisham atava yoginameva kule bhavati dimatam etadi durlabhataram loke janma drisham eva yoginameva mutam durlabhataram loke janma drisham. Chenske, or actually, what's the word? Dhamma. Is that right? Dhamma? Dhamma. Daiva yoginameva Kule bhavati dimatam etadi durlabhataram loke janma drisham atava or yoginam of learned transcendentalists eva certainly kule in the family bhavati takes birth dimatam of those who are endowed with great wisdom etat this he certainly durlabhataram very rare loke in this world janma birth yat that which idrisham like this. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Or if unsuccessful after long practice of yoga, he takes his birth in a family of transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. Certainly such a birth is rare in this world. Purport. Birth in a family of yogis or transcendentalists, those with great wisdom, is praised herein, because the child born in such a family receives a spiritual impetus from the very beginning of his life. It is especially the case in the Acharya or Goswami families. Such families are very learned and devoted by tradition and training, and thus they become spiritual masters. In India, there are many such Acharya families, but they have now degraded due to the insufficient education and training. By the grace of the Lord, there are still families that force the transcendentalists generation after generation. It is certainly very fortunate to take birth in such families. Fortunately, both our spiritual master, Om Vishnupad, Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, and our humble self had the opportunity to take birth in such families. By the grace of the Lord, and both of us were trained in the devotional service of the Lord from the very beginning of our lives. Later on, we met by the order of the transcendental system. Taive yoginam eva kule bhavati dimatam etadi durlabhata ram loke janmat ed idrisham. Or, if unsuccessful, after long practice of yoga, he takes his birth in a family of transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. Certainly such a birth is rare in this world. Namo Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswatam Deve Gauravani Vicharne Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paskyatyade Siddharne. There are different symptoms of auspicious birth. And here it goes over the most auspicious birth one can take. A birth in a devotee family, but not only birth in a devotee family, but birth in a devotee family so that one is trained up from the very beginning of life in Krishna consciousness. As Prahlad Maharaj said, that it is, what is that first word ever? Kamara acharat pragya, Kamara acharat pragya, dharmam bhagavataniha, durlabham manusha janma, tadyatadam adruvam, artadam. So from the very beginning of life, Kamara acharat pragyo, dharman bhagavatan iha, that one should be trained up in Bhagavad Dharma. That is, one should hear that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that we're His eternal servants, and that the perfection of life is to engage in His service. No matter what situation we're under, it's not so important. What's important is that we understand our relationship with Krishna. So, Kamar Acharat Pragya, Dharman Bhagavatan Iha Durlabham Manusha Janma. That is very rare to get a human form of life. Now, one who has the vision that everyone is a spiritual being, we can see how fortunate we are to have the human form of life. There are so many insects. As I pointed out in my room, there were probably, at one time, there were as many people, ants in my room as probably there were people in Slovenia. Maybe a little bit more ants. And they were quite enthusiastic. It's not that they were thinking, I'm an ant, I should be humble, because I did so many sinful activities in my past life, now I've been born as an ant. No, they were wondering why I was there. Why this big, simple obstacle for our normal activities is interfering with us. So, there are so many species of life, and they completely outnumber the human beings. And only in the human form of life can one understand one's relation with Krishna. Otherwise, we have to understand only our relationship with these gross and subtle material bodies, which is quite unfortunate, because there's no future in such existence. If every day we're happy just so we eat and sleep, and if we have a little extra mating, and if we can defend, we consider ourselves to be on the top of the universe. But it's very unfortunate because no matter how much we eat or sleep or other things, we're never satisfied. We have to do the same thing over and over again. And it's not so easy to eat, sleep, mate, and defend in some species of life. You have to work hard. Just like now with this coronavirus, they're predicting, maybe, I don't know, in Slovenia, but in other places, so many people will be out of work. And therefore, they'll be in anxiety if they're going to make enough money to eat. And if they're going to eat, well, they can eat what they want. So many restaurants will have to close down, and people can't get pizza anymore, or Chinese food in America. They consider that worse than death. And on top of that, they cancel so many football games, so many sports games in America, so people, they don't really care about their job. They care more about whether or not they can go to their sports game or not. Of course, this is worse than the Great Depression, they consider. And the Great Depression, there was something like a certain percentage in America of unemployed, and within a week or 10 days or whatever it was, or 9, whatever the amount of time, more people are now unemployed than were in the Great Depression in America. And not only that, but we're just beginning. We have no idea really what the consequences are for this. So people are thinking, well, we're in a civilized country and we have all these resources. We don't need Krishna consciousness. This is for people who are weak, who have to rely upon God. We don't rely upon God. We rely upon the almighty euro. In the euro, we trust. In America, they have this thing that says, in God we trust. But now you won't be able to trust that piece of paper anymore. So, the idea is that people should be educated from the beginning of life in God consciousness. And then they can actually understand simple things. As they say in Kali Yuga, common sense is quite uncommon. Even simple things like the fact that their bodies are changing, but they're not changing, which is probably the most obvious thing we could possibly imagine, that we're all eternal, and yet this is considered to be fantastic, phantasmagoria, to consider that I'm eternal. Even the learned scholars, they can't figure it out. They've been around here since birth, their body is completely different, and still they're convinced that they're their body. If you go to Harvard University or Oxford University or the biggest universities, there's no class to teach you that you're not your body. Matter of fact, if you go to a university and you tell people I'm not my body, they'll call the psychiatrist to take you away. This person is suffering from mental depression. He doesn't believe it's his body. He may be dangerous. Who knows what he will do? He might even be a Hare Krishna, a religious fanatic. He probably believes in God. So people are not educated. It's not that bad. It seems like it's getting worse. No. So people are not educated, even the most basic principles. Now, if you go to India, at least some time ago, if you met a farmer in the field, he'd know that he wasn't his body. He'd think you're crazy if you thought you were your body. So even the most basic knowledge was common knowledge in other cultures, but the more sophisticated people become, so-called sophisticated, the more difficult it is to even understand common sense. Now, Krishna says one is very fortunate if one takes birth in a family of such transcendentalists. But that means that from the very beginning of life, they should be educated in Bhagavad Dharma. I was the temple president of the first Gurukul in ISKCON. Don't tell anyone, I'll get into trouble. It was in Turtle Creek in Texas. We started our first Gurukul there. And then they took me out of the temple presidency. I became the cook and the treasurer. No, the treasurer first and the cook. But anyways, then we moved to Gurley Street. First we were in a place called Turtle Creek Park. Anyway, whatever it was. Turtle Creek. And there was just like 5 or 6 or 7 Gurukul students there. But then eventually we moved to Gurley Street, and they started the Gurukul there. And Prabhupada came there, I think, around 4 times. And I was there with Prabhupada. I was a temple president at that time also, but of a different temple. And I was with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada, he simply came to Dallas for the Gurukul. The Gurukul was there, and he taught Dwarkadish how to write. And that's what he mostly spoke about, was Prahlad Maharaj when he was there. So Prabhupada was very much interested, even if it was going to be difficult to establish Gurukul in the West. I mean, you can't imagine how austere the first Gurukul was. When I went there, we were actually, there was one deprogrammer whose name was Ted Patrick. He's known as Black Lightning. He was really slow. And he said, these boys and girls, they got them eating off of wax paper. Because that's what we were doing. We were eating off of wax paper. Because we didn't have enough money for plates. The Gurukul didn't have enough plates. So they put wax paper on the floor. And then they put the subjis. That was all right. The subjis were pretty good on the wax paper. It was the dal that didn't work very well. If you go to the temple on Gurley Street, Radha Chandri's temple, and if you go up to where we used to take prasadam, you been there? In Gurley Street. There's 2 buildings. There's one which was like where the temple is. They have the restaurant there, and then we have another one where it was like an ashram and some offices. And part of that, there was like this place where they used to have their services, because it used to be a temple, a church. And the temple it had a wooden floor. It's like this, very much older than this one, but it was a wooden floor. And that's where we used to take prasadam, the 100 Gurukul students. And when I used to visit there, they put the wax paper out, and they first put the sabji, and then the rice, and then the dal, and then you kind of like try to get the dal off the floor, because it ran onto the floor. So if you go there now, you can still smell the original flavor of the dal that was offered. It's still on the floor. Still smells like dal on the floor. But if you're a devotee, it's not so bad. Reminds you of the dal, rice, and chapatis. So the temple was quite poor, and there was only 2 showers for 100 children. Made it difficult. It wasn't that they wanted to be poor, but that was the financial resources they had at the time. I lived there for some time. I was actually temple president there twice. So one time I was the temple president, I was living in where the Gurukul students were formerly, because they moved out. And it was during 1 month they had 100, I guess here, it was something like 53 degrees temperature every day. It was a record temperature in Dallas. It was so hot that all the insects died. They burned. All the crickets and everything. You didn't hear any crickets because they were all crisped. Crispy crickets. Because nowadays, if crickets are crisp, if they got fried like that, people would come out and eat them. And that time, people weren't so into those things. In any case, the Gurukul there was very austere, but Prabhupada came there every time, and he tried to encourage the devotees to keep on this Gurukul, that this was actually the future of our movement. And there were many sincere devotees who try to further the Gurukul, but it was very, very difficult. Imagine being 20 years old, and suddenly you have 100 kids you're in charge of. Even if you're 20 years old, you had 1 child to take care of, it would be difficult enough. But to speak of trying to manage 100 of them, and they're all away from their families. And they didn't want to be there. Half of them didn't want to be there. And half the The teachers, after a week or two, didn't want to be there either. No one wanted to be there, except for the cockroaches. They had these cockroaches there, they were called flying dates. They were literally that big. And they had wings, and they'd fly. In any case, it wasn't the best circumstances, but still some very nice devotees came from there, and they did the best they could. But that was Prabhupada had to establish it, because it's essential that eventually children are trained up from the beginning of their lives in Krishna consciousness. If not, in an ashram situation especially, because it's education is not meant simply to acquire so-called knowledge, especially not simply technological knowledge. Education is supposed to be for character training, to develop first-class men. Even people can't understand the difference between themselves and their body, at least they should be able to understand the fact that we need first-class men, like even honest people, someone who actually tells the truth, someone who's actually able to tolerate difficult circumstances and at the same time be appreciative and loving and considerate. So, to train our first-class people in tolerance, austerity, mercy, truthfulness. That's what education is meant for. And in the absence of that, when you have technologists who are trying to figure out how to kill everyone, then that satisfies that the latest weapon only goes at the speed of 5 times the speed of sound. They want to make sure it goes 20 times the speed, hypersonic, atomic bombs, because otherwise we may die instead of in a minute or two. They want to make sure we can die in a couple of seconds. So this technological advancement is not necessarily developing men of character or women of character. That will actually make the society peaceful, happy, and progressive. If we read Chaitanya Charitamrita, the very culture itself produced people of quality. Even ordinary people were honest, they were austere, they were truthful, they were merciful. Just the culture itself developed those qualities. And now, due to the lack of such a culture, everything is becoming deteriorating. We can't even imagine here in Slovenia what the level of deterioration is there in so-called more advanced countries, where if you say that you're a man or a woman, people melt. They're called snowflakes. They can't tolerate being called a man or a woman because they feel offended, because they don't identify themselves as male or female. They identify themselves as one of the 72 possible gender orientations that were listed. And you have to learn all 72 generated. It's like you have to learn a whole other alphabet. It's another language. So you can properly address people so they don't feel offended and melt. So that's what a society has come down to, is that people, if you call them, excuse me, sir, and they go, what? What did you call me? I'm calling the police, Please send the psychiatrist too. My mind has become so disturbed. So this is not what society is meant for. It's meant for people who can actually have vision. Andaya tandera pigiyamanaste piksha tandra uruidami bara. People have vision, what the purpose of human form of life is, how to actually make a peaceful, happy, progressive civilization, where people can eat nice food, offered to Krishna, pure air, have nice accommodations, prosperity, and nice relationships with each other. That everyone can do something valuable, progressive for society, And ultimately they can become God conscious. They can realize the harmony, the unity within this universe, within this world, and everyone can work cooperatively and peaceful, whatever their situation may be, and get whatever they need, because everything will be supplied by Krishna. On the other hand, when people are trained up to become demons and atheists by so-called education, then the result is that there's more and more disharmony. And there's scarcity. People are not prepared, for instance, to not have some job. But what are all these jobs? In other words, what were they doing? I remember when I grew up, there was no computers. So what were they doing? Actually, one of the things they were doing is that down my block, I lived in Brooklyn. Have you ever been to Brooklyn? It's not exactly, there's more people on my street than practically there are in Ljubljana. My high school had 10,000 students. What's that?
10,000 students?
Yeah, the high school. My college, my one college I went to, University of Buffalo, only had 40,000 students. The next one had 55,000, University of Texas. And how many students they have at the university here?
37.
37,000, that's pretty big. And in Europe, small country, big educational system. What's that?
Whole country is here in the university.
Oh, okay. So, I forgot the point I was making. That the obviously the educational system is not really meant to train people to become first-class human beings. And therefore, instead of technology being supreme, which people think is education, actually education should be for the benefit and the welfare of everyone, not for simply a small group of people or even a country. Even in Europe previously, they didn't have these countries. They didn't exist. They had kingdoms. And the kingdoms were not divided up necessarily according to any race or religion. They were across religions. Like in Belgium now, they have the Walloon, and they have the Walloon is the French side, and then what's that? Flemish, yeah. That was just part of one kingdom. And it was a bigger kingdom than that, because it wasn't based upon all these sectarian conceptions. It was based upon who can conquer the other kingdom. It was based upon more or less that, but it was always changing. So therefore, even in Russia, you can go there, a lot of the Russian words are French, at least some of them. And even here, there's so many words coming from Italian and all different things, because there was such a mixture. But now everyone's just dividing up because their material conception of life is simply increasing, and therefore people are becoming more and more divided. Belgium, the Walloons and the Flemish, they can't get along. And if they divide up like that, like in Spain, they have, every part of Spain, they speak a different language. Although you expect that they speak Spanish in most parts, which they do in most parts. But they have so many languages there. They have languages that aren't even spoken anywhere else except for that part. They have besides Catalan, which is a mixture of French and Spanish, in the País Vasco, they have Basque, which is a completely different language. And then on the side which is facing Portugal, they have a combination of Portuguese and Spanish. And then they have, anyhow, so many different, when I was doing book distribution in Spain, I spoke Spanish more or less at the time. And some parts I couldn't understand a word they were saying. Other parts I could understand everything. Even that was the Spanish there. I just shake my head and say, yes, yes, yes. Donación, por favor. So that's the way the material world will go. If people are not developing character, if they're not developing love and appreciation for each other, if they don't see the unity, they don't understand the law of karma, then there's no possibility of unity within the society. They don't understand what they're doing, what their destination is going to be, and therefore they can't even develop progressively higher levels of character in this lifetime, what to speak of preparing for the next lifetime. If everyone is simply interested in accumulating wealth for sense gratification, then there's no understanding how the material world works, there's no education like that, then how you can expect that people will make any progress towards liberation from their fears and anxieties and everything else that accompanies the bodily concept of life. Therefore, Krishna says, for one who is not in Krishna consciousness can have neither controlled mind nor steady intelligence, without which there is no possibility of peace, and how can there be any happiness without peace? So unless people understand Krishna or God, they understand how to relate to God and how to relate to things in relationship to Krishna, then they can have neither controlled mind nor steady intelligence, without which there's no possibility of peace. And if there's no peace, there's no question of happiness. No matter how much they cover over their misery with things like intoxication or sports or movies and entertainment, still they can't be peaceful or happy. And eventually the reactions come about and we have our present situation. And who knows how it's going to wind up. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
At what age do the children enter the Gurukul, and how many years it's supposed to last?
Well, generally the age of Gurukul starts at 5, Kaumara. Kaumara starts at 5 years old. And then it usually depends on what your education is. Now, not everyone went to Gurukul. Generally speaking, only the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins went to Gurukul. Everyone else was homeschooled. They were trained in occupations, like especially farming and things like that, or like some technical trade for the Shudras. So they were trained by their fathers usually in some kind of craft or some kind of trade or occupation. Only the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas went to school at 5 years old, and they usually stayed depending on how serious they were. Sometimes they would stay for their whole life in the Gurukul if they were going to become Brahmins. Then sometimes they set up their own schools, or they became sannyasis. They took sannyas right away. I don't know how often that happened, but that was a possibility. But generally until 25, from 5 to 25, or sometimes less than that. If they got married, then it may be less than that. It depends on how much. Like Abhimanyu, he was 16 years old and he fought on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, so obviously he graduated early.
How about the Krishna and the cowherd boys? They also went to the Gurukul, even though they were like...
Not as cowherd boys. Vaishyas didn't go to school. They got trained up. Krishna got trained up taking the cows out every day. That was his training. He knew how to milk cows. He knew how to herd cows, and he knew how to play with the cowherd boys. His main business was playing with the cowherd boys. He didn't learn the 64 arts until he went to Sandipani Muni's ashram in Ujjain. After he went to Mathura and killed Kamsa, and then he stayed with Vasudeva and Devaki, and then they sent him to Gurukul, Sandipani Muni's ashram, for 64 days and nights. Then he learned the arts for a Kshatriya. For others, he learned the 64 arts. Yes. Anything else? Yes.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, thank you, Maharaj. I want to ask you, how is possible, how it can happen that somebody is born in a family of very advanced devotees, but he don't become devotee of Krishna?
Well, there's so many instances of that. Advaita Acharya, he had 6 sons. 3 of them became devotees, like Achyutananda, and others, 3 of them became Mayavadis. So even God has children that they don't always turn out to be well, because everyone has their free will. Now, Prabhupada also had children. Some of them turned out to be devotees, partly devotees, but none of them became very advanced devotees. Why did that happen? It's because Krishna does, as explained, why did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, first of all, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't have devotees, have children, but why? Because in the case of Advaita Acharya, he didn't want people to claim that they were devotees simply by birthright. If everyone became a devotee in his family, then the Goswami conception that because I took birth in a family, the Nityananda Vamsas, therefore I'm automatically should be considered a great devotee. So there's an example for us that it's by qualification, it's not by birth. And other reasons also. We have Chitraketu, who's a great devotee. Narada Muni and Parvata Muni personally came to meet with him, and yet his son was actually his enemy from his past lifetime, Harsha Maharsha, who took birth just to cause him trouble. So that's the laws of karma, how things work. Even these Brahmins, Shringi, he took birth in a great family, but it probably said that actually his qualification to take birth in such a great Brahmin family as Samika Rishi, who's the name of his father? Samika Rishi, who a great devotee, Brahmin devotee. Why did he take birth in such a family? Because in his last lifetime he was a demon fighting on the shore of the ocean of milk with the demigods. And because he was killed by a demigod in a religious war, he took birth as a Brahmin on this planet. But because he had that demoniac tendency, he cursed Priksha Maharaj. So it says many demons at that time were killed on the shore of the ocean of milk fighting the demigods, took birth as Brahmins on this planet. So the law of karma is quite intricate. Yes.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Yes, I would like to know what should women do to be protected from men?
From men?
Yeah, in this...
Men are supposed to protect the women.
No,
You can learn karate. What do you mean by protected from men?
Yeah, isn't it that women should be protected?
They should be protected by men.
Yeah, by men.
We're not that advanced in Kali Yuga yet. What should women do to... Well, first of all, the men have to be trained, and the women have to be trained too. Prabhupada said the man is good, the woman is good, and often their combination is bad. So you have to have training. Men have to be trained how to protect women, and women have to be trained how to be protected by men. That they have their role to play, the men have their role to play. And then if they work together harmoniously, then they both spiritually advance. And even materially speaking, the goddess of fortune will be kind upon them. It's a question of training. Otherwise, if there's no training, then how can we're not protected from our own minds? We can't be protected from our own senses unless we're trained. As Prahlad Maharaj said, there's no enemy in this world except for our uncontrolled mind. That takes some training and some organization. Prabhupada said organization and intelligence. And then we can see how everyone's duty fits together, how everyone is necessary to work together, how everyone has an important role to play in society. Then everyone will be appreciated for what they can actually do best. Anything else? Yes.
You do know that devotee from Sarajevo, Amala Prema.
Yeah, sure.
Her mother, Eka Prema, just passed away.
Oh, okay. So maybe we can chant one Hare Krishna for her. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Gaur Premanande.